She lived with nothing but a bow and her brother's last prayer, until 10. Comanche warriors rode into her valley with a bundle wrapped in faded blue cloth. What they returned wasn't just bones. It was a forgotten history. Stay with us for a story of silence, blood, and legacy. Like, comment, and subscribe for more. For nearly 8 years, Miriam Thorne lived alone on the far side of Bitterwind Valley, tucked between rust-colored hills and wild sagebrush that no longer cared to bloom. With no neighbors for miles and no company but the wind, she built her days from silence and her nights from memories she couldn't burn. Her brother Eli had vanished in the South Country, riding out with promises and prayers, never returning, leaving behind a single note, a bent horseshoe, and a half-finished arrowhead he carved the morning before. Since then, Miriam carried the bow he made for her at 12 and the prayer he whispered at dusk the day he rode out. Everyone told her to let go, that the land was cruel, that the Comanche didn't spare lone riders, that the desert swallowed men like Eli without leaving bones. But she never buried him, never mourned him properly, because in her gut she knew someone had taken him, but something had kept him. Each morning she rose with the same routine: tend the goats, check the traps, shoot 3 arrows toward the sun, and listen. Not for horses, not for voices, but for absence breaking. That evening, the sky hung low and orange like old parchment, and Miriam stood in the clearing behind her cabin, drawing her brother's bow for the last of the 3 shots. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from effort, but from something else, a tension in the wind she couldn't place. The arrow loosed clean and landed dead center, yet she didn't move to retrieve it. Her eyes were fixed on the ridge beyond the creek bed, where a line of dust now rose slowly and steadily. 10 riders, no banners, no sound. But the silhouettes were unmistakable. Comanche. Her breath hitched. They moved like smoke down the trail, deliberate and solemn, as if pulled by a purpose not entirely their own. They carried no rifles, no lances, only bundles, one of which, she realized with a lurch in her stomach, was long, narrow, and wrapped in faded blue cloth. Her knees weakened, but she did not fall. She stepped forward instead, bow in hand, heart in her throat. The lead rider slowed as they neared the cabin, eyes never leaving hers. When they finally stopped, dust curling around their horses like fog, he dismounted with quiet grace and set the bundle gently at her feet. "We bring back what was left," he said. His voice was soft, weathered, full of weight. Miriam stared at the cloth frayed at the ends, stained by time, but tied with a knot she recognized. Eli's knot. She knelt. Her fingers reached but did not touch. She looked up at the rider, her voice dry as bone. "Where did you find him?" The man did not answer immediately. He looked toward the hills, as though memory lay waiting there. Then he said, "He was not lost. He stayed." And that, somehow, was worse than death. Why do you think Eli stayed with the Comanche all those years? And what might be hidden inside the bundle beyond just his bones? Drop your theories in the comments. The air felt thick around Miriam, as if the valley itself had turned inward to listen. Her fingers hovered above the bundle like it was something sacred, or cursed, or both. The knot at the end of the faded blue cloth was tight and familiar, Eli's style, always 2 wraps in a loop. It had held his tools, his maps, and once, a sparrow with a broken wing. But now it held bones, maybe his, maybe not. Her mouth was dry. "Did he die with you?" she asked, her voice thin as wind. The Comanche man didn't answer immediately. He crouched beside her, not too close, his movements deliberate and calm. His face was carved by sun and story, with deep lines at the corners of his eyes that told of years lived more in silence than in speech. "He died alone," he said, "but not lonely." Miriam swallowed the ache rising in her throat. The phrase hung heavy in the evening air, like a truth too raw to handle. "He was taken?" she asked. No, the man said. He stayed. Her head snapped toward him. Why? The man reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a smaller bundle, a medicine pouch, leather worn smooth by years of touch. He came to find something, the man continued, and when he did, he gave us something back. He handed the pouch to her. She hesitated, then took it. It was light, almost weightless, yet holding it felt like gripping stone. She opened the flap. Inside were a few wild herbs, a folded piece of paper, and a single arrowhead unfinished, the tip still rough, edges uneven. Eli's last work. She turned the paper over. His handwriting, unmistakable. 4 words. This is where I end. Her chest tightened. Her eyes burned. She looked up at the man, anger rising like heat. You could have sent word, she snapped. You could have told me. The man's gaze was steady. He asked us not to. He said it was not your burden. Until it was finished. And now it's finished? She asked bitterly. The man stood and gestured to the others. One by one, the riders dismounted and removed items from their saddlebags, small satchels, carved trinkets, a piece of worn fabric embroidered with unfamiliar symbols. They laid them out carefully around the bundle like a shrine. Now it begins, the man said. Miriam looked around, stunned. The night had deepened, the sun nearly gone, the air growing colder by the breath. She clutched the medicine pouch close to her chest. Why did he stay? She asked again, barely above a whisper. The man's eyes darkened, his voice lower. Now, because he carried a name that did not belong in your world or ours. And he chose to lay it down where it would be remembered, not erased. A gust of wind swept through the clearing. The blue cloth rippled. Miriam reached forward, hands trembling. She untied the knot. The knot came loose easier than Miriam expected, like the bundle had been waiting to be opened. As she unwrapped the final fold, the world around her seemed to shrink, sound pulled inward, colors dulling, the air itself thick with a sacred weight. Inside, the bones were carefully arranged, each one wrapped in faded red thread. It wasn't just a burial bundle, it was ceremonial, honored, loved. She stared at the delicate curve of a jawbone, the slender arc of a femur, the thin, weather-worn pieces of a spine that once carried Eli across 100 miles of wild land. The bones were clean. No blood, no decay, only silence. Her breath caught in her chest. It was the kind of silence that didn't come from death, but from years of being remembered. She didn't cry, not yet. The tears sat behind her eyes like distant thunder waiting. Instead, she reached out and touched the thread along one rib, running her thumb over the texture. It was sinew wrapped with beads, the kind the Comanche used for naming rights. Her gaze lifted slowly to the man who had first spoken. What did he become to you? She asked. He was your brother, the man replied evenly, but to us, he was something else. He was the bridge. Between what? Between silence and story. Between forgetting and naming. Another warrior stepped forward, now an older woman with a long braid wrapped in red cloth. She knelt beside the bones and placed a bundle of dried sage beside the rib cage, then pressed a painted handprint onto the ground next to it. Miriam watched, confused and reverent. His bones were kept safe, the woman said. Not buried, not burned, because he chose to leave behind a name that didn't belong to the one he was born with. What name did he take? Miriam asked. The woman pointed to a curved bone at the top of the bundle, a shoulder blade etched with a single word in red pigment. Miriam couldn't read it, but the older woman whispered, Tozihana. The warriors all bowed their heads at once. Miriam turned to the lead man. What does it mean? One who carries no flag, he said. One who walks without tribe but listens with 2 hearts. A lump rose in Miriam's throat. Eli had always straddled 2 worlds, hers and his own mind. He had questions about their family, about their blood, about what their mother never told them before she died. Now she understood. He didn't die running from something. He died settling into what he'd found. But why had the Comanche returned now? After all this time, what had changed? She looked back at the bones. The thread on the ribs was loose, as if it had been recently unwound. Something had been taken out, or something was missing. Why bring him back now? She asked again. The lead warrior didn't answer with words. He lifted his chin slightly. "Because now it is your turn to choose," he said. "To carry what he left, or to let it scatter like ash on wind." Miriam looked down at the open bundle, the bones. Quiet and still. Something had indeed begun, but it wasn't mourning. It was inheritance. Night settled hard and quiet across Bitterwind Valley, draping the hills in deep blue shadows and wrapping the dry earth in cold breath. The fire burned low, its light more for ritual than warmth. Miriam sat cross-legged, the bundle of bones. Beside her, wrapped once more in the blue cloth, resting like a body laid for vigil. The Comanche had made a circle, not of authority, but of shared witness. They didn't speak much, but their silence wasn't empty. It carried shape, weight, intention. One of the younger warriors handed Miriam a small bowl carved from dark wood, steam curling from its rim. The scent was bitter sage and root, something deeper, older. "Drink," said the older woman with the red braid. He drank it the night he chose. Miriam hesitated. Chose what? The woman didn't answer, not with words. Instead, she lifted her palm and pressed 2 fingers over her heart. Chose who he was. Miriam sipped. The tea was sharp and earthy, coating her tongue in warmth that traveled straight to her spine. The fire crackled once sharp loud, like a shot in the silence, and then the valley seemed to breathe in. The man who had first spoken, the one who brought the bundle, leaned closer. "Your brother came here looking for blood," he said. "But not to spill it, to trace it." Miriam felt the warmth in her stomach churn. "What do you mean?" He had questions. "About your mother, her father, where she came from." He knew pieces. Fragments. He came to us with names that didn't belong on the land he grew up on. What did he find? That he was not white enough for the badge he wore, not red enough for the tribes he sought, but honest enough for the spirits who still listen when the wind moves through the cedar. The fire hissed as a stick cracked, sending a short plume of sparks skyward. "He asked to be taken in," Miriam said. "He offered himself," the man replied, "not to become one of us, but to protect a memory we were losing. He knew the names, the lines, the stories that were almost dust." Miriam felt something rise in her throat, a feeling she couldn't name. Pride, maybe. Guilt. Loss. All 3 braided together like the red threads on his bones. "And now?" she asked. "Now what do you want from me?" The warriors glanced at one another, not urgently, but with quiet gravity. The older woman stood and walked to the center of the firelight. In her hands she held something wrapped in buckskin, smaller than the bone bundle, but heavier in meaning. She placed it between them. This was his final request, the woman said. He could not finish the walk, but he believed you could. Miriam looked down at the bundle. It was bound with a clasp made from antler and bone. Her hands moved before her thoughts did. Inside was a narrow bow smaller than hers, lightweight and shaped in the mescalero style. Along its spine, etched in delicate script, was a single phrase, "For the one who still listens." Miriam's heart thudded. He made this? No. The man said, he only asked for it to be passed down, because the stories do not need to end where one life does. Miriam looked into the fire, the flames dancing like echoes of voices just out of reach. Something had changed. She didn't just feel loss, she felt pulled towards something she hadn't asked for, but maybe had always carried. The warrior looked at her. "You do not have to accept what he left." But if you do, we will walk with you to where he could not go." Miriam gripped the bow, the curve of it fitting into her palm like a returning heartbeat. She said nothing. But the fire knew her answer. Dawn didn't rise, it crept. It bled slowly over the ridges like truth through old scars, painting the earth in tones of rust and fire. Miriam stood on the high rock ledge above the camp, where the horizon broke clean and the silence tasted like metal. She held the new bow in one hand, her brother's medicine pouch in the other. Below her, the Comanche warriors moved quietly, saddling horses, cinching straps, speaking in low voices that echoed like riverbed wind. They had said nothing more through the night. There was no persuasion, no urging, only presence. And that presence pressed gently on her like the weight of a hand laid on the shoulder, an invitation, not a command. She looked at the pouch, thumb grazing the edge of the stitched leather. It still held the unfinished arrowhead. She'd carried it with her through the night, not knowing why. Only that letting go of it felt like letting go of breath. She remembered Eli's last winter home, the way he would sit in silence by the fire, carving for hours, not speaking, not blinking, until his hands were stained with cold dust and thought. "Some things ain't meant to be finished," he once said. "They're meant to be passed." At the time she thought he meant the arrow. Now she wasn't so sure. One of the horses below neighed. The lead warrior, his name she still hadn't asked, looked up at her, his expression unreadable in the half-light. He didn't wave, didn't call, just waited. Miriam took a breath and looked back toward the land behind her. Her cabin, small, weather-worn, full of memories, stood still in the distance. It looked smaller than it used to. Or maybe she had changed shape. She wasn't running from it, but she wasn't returning to it either. She descended slowly, boots scuffing the rock, the wind carrying dust and echoes between each step. At the foot of the ridge, the lead warrior offered her a horse. Black, lean, steady. "She will not fight you," he said. She remembers him. Miriam stroked the mare's neck. The animal leaned into her touch with a familiarity that struck her chest like a soft blow. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To the place he left," the warrior said. "To finish what you both began," she mounted, the saddle creaking softly. The bow rested across her back now, the medicine pouch tied at her belt. She felt neither like a settler nor a Comanche, neither lost nor found, just moving. The 10 riders formed around her. No formation, no rank, just movement. The valley opened before them. The trail ahead was long and red and quiet. As they rode, the older woman with the red braid turned to Miriam and said, "When we get there, you will know what to do." "What if I don't?" Miriam asked. "Then the land will remind you," the woman said. "It remembers him. It remembers her." "Her," the woman gave a single slow nod. "The one who carried you before memory. The one he went to find." Miriam's fingers clenched the reins. Something shifted inside her, something deep and old and waiting to bloom. For the first time in years, she was riding not toward loss, but toward a truth that had waited patiently in the hills. And in that truth, her mother's name rose like smoke through her brother's bones. The journey across the plateau was wordless, but never quiet. The land spoke constantly through the clatter of hooves against dry stone, the hush of wind bending brittle grass, and the distant cry of hawks riding thermals high above. Miriam listened, not for voices, not for signs, but for feeling. Something in her chest pulsed with every mile, something old and unfinished, like a melody half remembered. The Comanche didn't press her with questions. They moved like shadows at the edge of firelight, present, protective, but never interrupting the burn. As the sun slanted lower in the sky, they crested a ridge and the land opened wide below them, a valley carved with veins of dried riverbeds, brush, and stone. At its heart stood a single cottonwood tree, its roots buried deep in the parched soil, its branches tangled with strips of red cloth fluttering like whispers. "What is this place?" Miriam asked, her voice raspy with dust. The lead warrior answered without turning. "This is where he ended his walk." She tightened her grip on the reins. "Where he died. Where he was reborn," the woman with the red braid said behind her. They descended slowly, the cottonwood growing larger with each hoofstep. Around its base, Miriam saw the remnants of an old circle stones arranged carefully, markings scorched into the dirt, now faded but not forgotten. She dismounted without a word. The wind here felt heavier, thicker with memory. She knelt near the base of the tree, where the roots broke the earth open like reaching fingers. There, buried shallow in the dust, was a carved wooden marker, weather-worn. Tilted, upon it, a single word in Mescalero Apache, Nande. She turned to the warriors. "What does it mean?" The woman replied softly, "It means mother." Miriam's heart froze. "My mother?" The lead warrior nodded once. "Your brother came seeking her. Not a grave. A memory, a name. She was from here? Her blood, her story, her silence." Miriam looked down at the marker. The dust moved slightly as the wind shifted, revealing another smaller stone nearby, flat, round, smooth. Etched into its surface were two names, Nande, and below it, in smaller familiar script, Eli Thorne. Miriam dropped to her knees. "He buried himself beside her?" "Not a burial," said the lead warrior. "A binding. He returned what? Was lost. But how did he know?" she whispered. "She never told us anything." The woman sat beside her. "Because silence is the first language of grief, and your mother carried many ghosts. He came here to give them a voice." Miriam reached into the medicine pouch and pulled out the unfinished arrowhead. It glinted softly in the waning light. She placed it between the two markers. The earth seemed to exhale. Around her the air warmed. "He wanted me to finish something," she said, almost to herself. "He wanted you to begin," the woman corrected. The warriors began to circle the tree, placing small tokens, lighting bundles of sage, painting the ground with ochre and ash. Miriam stood slowly. The bow on her back felt heavier now, but not as burden. As legacy. She faced the valley beyond the cottonwood. The woman stepped beside her. "Tomorrow," she said, "you will choose what story to carry forward." "And tonight?" Miriam asked. The woman looked up at the red cloths in the branches. "Tonight, you remember who you were before you forgot." That night, sleep came not like a blanket but like a veil, thin, shifting, and full of holes where memory leaked through. Miriam lay beneath the cottonwood tree, eyes closed, the fire casting long shadows that crawled over the ceremonial circle. Like slow, remembering fingers, the warriors had retreated into their own silence, some murmuring in low chant, others tending the flames. The air carried the sharp bite of sage and juniper, and something else, something sweet, almost metallic, that clung to her skin. She didn't remember falling asleep, but she remembered the dream. She stood in the middle of a wide, open plain, barefoot, bowless. The ground was soft beneath her feet, like soil that had once held rain. In the distance, a single figure approached, small at first, then clearer. A woman, tall, straight-backed, her face both young and impossibly old, her hair braided with red thread. Her eyes Miriam's eyes. They stopped an arm's length apart. The woman didn't speak. She lifted her palm, and in it, a river stone smooth and dark, carved with a spiral and a line across its center. She placed it into Miriam's hand. "You are the middle," the woman said. Her voice wasn't sound. It was wind, breath, echo. Between silence and name, Miriam wanted to ask who she was. But she already knew. Her mother. Not the mother who cooked stew and held her fevered brow, but the one who stood at the edge of blood and culture and chose to vanish into white quiet. The one who buried her name to give Miriam space to breathe. "Why didn't you tell me?" Miriam asked. "Because I wanted you free," the voice answered. "But freedom is not the absence of roots. It is knowing where they run." The ground beneath them shifted, and Miriam felt the weight of the arrowhead press against her palm, sharper now, warmer. She looked down. The bow was across her shoulders again, the medicine pouch tied to her belt. "You carry 2 hearts," the voice said. "But only one will lead." "Which one?" Miriam asked. The woman smiled softly. "The one that listens." The wind rose then, and the sky cracked with the sound of a hawk's scream. The woman's figure blurred, dissolving into dust. Then flame, then a single feather falling into Miriam's open hand. She woke with a sharp gasp. The fire still burned, the sage still smoked. Around her, the warriors slept. The cloths above rustled in the wind. But in her hand reel, tangible, lay a single hawk feather, not from the dream, from something older. She sat up slowly, clutching it to her chest. Her body ached, but not from fear, from memory. A deep, ancestral ache that whispered through her bones. Tomorrow they would ride. Not just to mark a grave, but to speak a name that had gone too long unspoken. And Miriam now knew what to say, not in English, not in silence, but in the language her mother had once buried and her brother had died to uncover. The canyon appeared just after sunrise, red cliffs rising like sleeping gods, scarred with time and heat, their surfaces painted with the stories of those who came long before. Miriam felt the change in the air the moment they entered. Temperature cooled, the wind quieted, and her horse moved slower, not from exhaustion, but from reverence. The warriors fell back as they approached the narrow mouth of the pass, letting Miriam ride forward alone. The path was carved between stone and silence, narrowing until even sound seemed afraid to echo. And then it opened. A wide basin flanked by sandstone, with a tall flat wall facing east. It was covered in symbols, spirals, handprints, animal tracks, sunbursts, and at its center, a single vertical line traced in blackened ochre. Beneath it, a fire pit long unused, a sacred place. A memory place. Miriam dismounted slowly. Her boots crunched against gravel and dust. The warriors stayed behind. This was hers now. She stepped toward the wall, the hawk feather tucked into her belt, the medicine pouch clutched in her hand. She pulled the bow from her back and laid it on the ground in front of the fire pit. Then she knelt and waited. The wind stirred first. Then the light shifted. And she began. She untied the pouch and laid each item inside upon the stone. The unfinished arrowhead, the bundle of herbs, the small scrap of her brother's final note. She took a breath and spoke not in English, but in the tongue her mother had hidden. The words came haltingly, but they came. Fragments learned from Eli, from the dream, from the land. She named herself, not as Miriam Thorn, but as Sienna Dene, the one who remembers. Then she named her brother, not as Eli, but as Chindikla, the walker between winds. The ground didn't shake. The fire pit didn't burst into flames. But the moment she spoke, the valley breathed. A hawk screamed overhead. And from behind her, she heard the warriors begin to sing low, rhythmic, rising like the wind through canyon reeds. The song wasn't for death. It was for the returning, for the binding of what had been forgotten. Miriam stood, placed the arrowhead into the pit, and lit a small flame. The smoke rose straight into the air, clean and unbroken. The woman with the red braid approached silently and held out a narrow stone knife. "Your brother gave us the last of his blood," she said. "But now the name must be sealed with yours." Miriam did not flinch. She took the blade and drew a single line across her palm, letting a drop fall into the fire. The wind picked up, swirling the smoke toward the cliff face. Where the black line had once stood alone, a second mark began to appear, rising upward. As if summoned, a mirrored image, two names, one memory. She turned back to the warriors. None of them smiled, but all nodded. "You have spoken," the lead warrior said. "And the land remembers." Miriam looked down at the fire. It was small now, soft, but it would keep burning until the smoke finished what her brother started. The fire burned down to embers long before the sun reached its peak. Still, Miriam didn't move. She sat at the base of the black-marked stone wall, watching the last tendrils of smoke curl and vanish into the high desert sky. Her blood had dried in the dust beside the arrowhead, seared into memory as surely as the ochre marks on stone. It wasn't grief she felt anymore. It wasn't even peace. It was stillness, the kind that comes only after everything has been said and nothing more needs to be. The warriors gave her space. They had returned to the horses, speaking softly in their own tongue, but always keeping her within reach, not guarding her, not guiding her, just waiting, as if they knew she would rise only when ready. When she did stand, it wasn't with heaviness, but with a strange lightness in her limbs, as if part of her had been left in the fire, fed to the smoke and carried upward. She made her way to the edge of the ridge overlooking the basin. From here, the valley looked like a cradle, one that had held her ancestors, her brother, her silence, and now, her voice. The bow felt different on her back, not foreign, not inherited, familiar, chosen. She turned to the warriors as they mounted. The woman with the red braid met her gaze. "There is no path home from this place," she said. "Not the one you came from." "I know," Miriam replied. Her voice didn't waver. The lead warrior approached on horseback and extended a bundle wrapped in soft hide. She took it without question. Inside was a coil of red cloth, a small carved flute, and a length of braided hair. Her brother's, a final piece. "He said it belonged to you," the man said. "He braided it before his last night, for the one who would carry his story." Miriam felt a lump rise in her throat, but did not let it fall. She tied the braid to the grip of her bow. The wind lifted slightly. She looked west, where the sun was beginning to set over distant hills. "Will you go back to Bitterwind?" the warrior asked. She shook her head. "That house isn't mine anymore." "Where will you go?" Miriam looked toward the horizon. "Wherever the story takes me." A quiet passed between them, not final, not farewell, just acknowledgement. A chapter closing with no lock. She mounted the black mare, its ears flicking, back at the sound of her voice. "Come on, girl," she whispered. "Let's go where he couldn't." And with that, she rode, not behind the warriors, not beside them, but ahead. Her shadow stretched long behind her, reaching toward the fire and the stone, even as the wind pulled her hair forward, toward lands untold. And behind her, in the valley, two names remained etched on the canyon wall, one in black, one in blood. Bound not by death, but by remembering. The road Miriam chose was not carved into the earth. It did not twist through towns or lead to marked rivers. It was a road made of wind and instinct, of story and silence. A path walked not with certainty, but with the steady rhythm of someone who had finally stopped running from their own shadow. For weeks she rode, never staying long, always moving westward. Through arroyos that whispered in the dark, across high plains that glowed blue in the moonlight. She didn't ask where she was going, she listened. And the land answered. In the smell of mesquite, in the cry of coyotes, in the way the sun sat lower on the horizon with each passing day. The bow on her back became more than a tool, it was a banner. The braid tied to its grip a promise that the story her brother couldn't finish would not fade into dust. In villages and camps, she asked old women questions. She traded stories for firewood, taught children how to notch their first arrow, and in return was told names she had never heard, some that belonged to her mother's people, others long gone. Her journey was never loud, but it left echoes. One night, under a sky heavy with stars, She lit a small fire near a stone outcrop and placed the flute from Eli's bundle beside it. She didn't know the song, but her breath found it, soft, hesitant at first, then strong. The notes rose into the dark like smoke rising from a long dead ember. And when she finished, the night remained still, but not empty. She looked out over the land and saw no one, yet somehow she did not feel alone. She was no longer the girl with the prayer and the bow, waiting by the door for news that would never come. She was the story now, the thread, the witness, the one who remembered. One morning, she came upon a marker on the trail, a small cairn bound with red cloth. No name, no sign. But it stopped her. She dismounted, walked to it, and stood still. She reached down and placed the last of Eli's beads atop the stones. Then she stood back and lifted her bow like a salute. The wind shifted, carried her name westward, not as Miriam Thorne, but as Sina Dene, and she walked on. Behind her, the desert watched and remembered.